It was a settlement that Russia claimed to have taken in late 2025. Russia was lying then. It has been defeated now. Ukraine just liberated Stepnohirsk, derussifying it overnight in a spectacular display of the sort of counterattacking genius that we've seen from Ukraine's forces during most of 2026. But this isn't any old victory. Stepnohirsk is one of the most strategically important settlements in Ukraine for a simple reason. It's key to the total liberation of Zaporizhzhia. On May 18th, the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, or HUR, broke the news that Ukrainian special forces had completed an operation that Russia never saw coming. Those forces hadn't just gained a little bit of ground in Stepnohirsk, they had completely overrun the settlement in a series of coordinated assault operations that pushed almost all of Putin's patsies out of their fortified positions. Russia's soldiers went running for any scrap of shelter that could protect them from Ukraine's forces. In the process, they abandoned key locations in Stepnohirsk to Ukrainian control. This was a capitulation of epic proportions, and much of it was caught on camera. Shared on Telegram by HUR, the footage tells the tale of Russia's Stepnohirsk failure. We see Ukrainian tanks rolling toward the settlement wrapped in cages that are designed to detonate incoming kamikaze drones before they can do their dangerous business. Rounds are rattled off. We see fire directed at Russian positions and coordinated by Ukraine's assault forces in tanks and armored vehicles. As the video goes on, we see Ukraine's armor rolling into Stepnohirsk itself. Troops on the ground engage in urban combat, searching for Russian infiltrators and then destroying them. Drones drop bombs, tanks fire more rounds. Piece by piece, the settlement is retaken. This is a loss beyond measure for Russia. But behind this problem is another major issue, as losing Stepnohirsk means that all of Putin's plans for Zaporizhzhia have crumbled into dust. But before we get to that, HUR has plenty more to say about what its operatives did leading up to May 18th. HUR revealed that this lightning-fast operation was carried out in close coordination with other Ukrainian units, with the goal of stabilizing the situation in Stepnohirsk while eliminating the Russian soldiers who had created defenses in key parts of the settlement. A combination of aerial reconnaissance and precision fire was used to achieve Ukraine's victory, as noted by Viktor Turkotyuk, who is the commander of the Artan unit that perhaps played the largest role in Ukraine's Stepnohirsk success. The comment tells us that drones, as has so often been the case, played a key role. But rather than flying into targets and dropping bombs, though we're sure that also happened, those drones provided Ukraine with an aerial view of the settlement as its troops moved through and recaptured territory. Turkotyuk continues, stating, "Every building was checked for surprises and remnants of enemy manpower. We do not rule out that the enemy will continue attempts to enter the city again, but we are ready for this." This wasn't some off-the-cuff operation. It was deliberate, well-planned, utterly lethal in its execution. The outcome of all of this was even worse than Russia expected. Not only were its troops almost entirely forced out of Stepnohirsk, but Ukraine also intelligently cut off almost every supply line that Russia has that it could use to support the few infiltrators that remain. A bridge into the settlement was destroyed. There is one road to the east of Stepnohirsk that appears to still remain, though using that road forces Russian equipment through a crossroads that puts them directly in the Ukrainian firing line. Putin now has a major problem on his hands. The few Russian soldiers who remain in Stepnohirsk have to be written off. There is no support coming for them. The best they can hope for is to take out 1 or 2 Ukrainian troops, though the reality is they're more likely to surrender or be destroyed. However, Putin's larger problem is that Ukraine cutting off the supply lines into Stepnohirsk makes it incredibly difficult for Russia to launch any sort of full-scale assault into the town. Russia will have to continue to rely on infiltrators, and we just saw how well that worked out. Of course, Russia attempted to defend its positions in the face of the relentless Ukrainian assault, but that defense was weak, suggesting that Russia hasn't been supplying its Stepnohirsk infiltrators for quite a while. The best they could muster was an FPV drone waiting in ambush for Ukraine's tanks and armored vehicles. That drone didn't even get close. United 24 media reports that it was detected and destroyed before it could hit any target. Hold on a second, one FPV drone? Did Russia really think that it would be able to defend Stepnohirsk with a single drone, or were its troops in the settlement so starved for supplies that this drone was all they could muster? It hardly matters now, as the settlement has been liberated and derussification can begin. What we see here is the sum total of a year's worth of failed Russian attempts to take Stepnohirsk, as revealed by the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov. For more than a year, the enemy has been unsuccessfully trying to occupy Stepnohirsk, throwing significant resources into it, but suffering enormous losses, Budanov declared, before giving credit where it was due to Ukraine's fighters. "I thank the special forces of the HUR of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and all the units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine, who throughout this time have demonstrated professionalism and courage, held the lines, and destroyed the Russian occupiers," Budanov said. He then concluded with the message that will sting Putin more than anything else: Russia now has no chance of threatening Zaporizhzhia. We'll be coming back to why that matters, but for now, Pravda reports that all key locations in Stepnohirsk are under the control of Ukraine's military. Russia will be getting flashbacks, and not to other major victories, such as the liberation of Kupiansk toward the end of 2025. No, Russia will see what just happened in Stepnohirsk, and it will know that HUR's impressive operation is a direct follow-up to something else that Ukraine had done just a couple of days before. On May 15th, United 24 media reported that Ukraine's forces had shattered the Russian defenses in the Kharkiv region, leading to the liberation of the village of Odradna, along with 22 kilometers of territory. The strategy is clear. Ukraine's active defense is all about identifying Russian weak points and hitting them hard to complete derussification. We saw it in the Kharkiv region on May 15th, and now we've seen it in Stepnohirsk. Putin can't even console himself with the belief that what Ukraine just achieved is a one-off, or a two-off. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that Russia's leader will be crying into his vodka because what he just saw in Stepnohirsk is part of a pattern that shows how the grand spring offensive that Russia launched in early March has fallen utterly flat on its face. Ukraine is just building on the back of an April that was already wildly successful on the counterattacking front. A May 2nd report by the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, revealed that Russia suffered its first net loss of territory against Ukraine since the August 2024 incursion into Russia's Kursk region. If we take that incursion out of the picture, the story gets even worse for Putin. Russia hasn't had a net loss since Ukraine's 2023 summer counteroffensive. Every single month since, barring August 2024, the Kremlin has been able to crow about territorial gains, no matter how meager they might have been. There was no Kremlin crowing in April. And the way that May is shaping up as Ukraine liberates settlements and Putin's forces continue running into a brick wall of defenses in the Donbass, we may be on the verge of seeing another Russian net loss. If we do, Stepnohirsk will be the highlight. And it, along with all of the other gains that Ukraine has been making over the past few months, signals to Putin that the momentum on the battlefield is shifting in Ukraine's favor. The ISW says that data from the battlefield has been indicating that a turnaround was about to happen for a while. The Russian rate of advance across the battlefield has been steadily declining since November 2025, as continued Ukrainian ground attacks, Ukrainian mid-range strikes, the February 2026 block on Russia's use of Starlink terminals in Ukraine, and the Kremlin's throttling of Telegram have exacerbated existing problems within the Russian military, the ISW pointed out in its May 2nd report. Russia hasn't been able to counter any of these problems. Now, what CNN dubs Russia's winning streak in Ukraine is officially over. Ukrainian soldiers are starting to feel it too. The tide has turned, claims an officer named Kirilo Bondarenko when speaking to CNN. He notes that the Russian forces Ukraine now fights are exhausted and that their morale has been sapped. Well, that's what happens when Putin churns through every semi-talented soldier that Russia has. All that's left is the disorganized, poorly trained meat that doesn't want to be in Ukraine in the first place. Cannon fodder doesn't win wars, no matter how much of it Putin has at his disposal. Ukraine has just proven that one well-coordinated counterattack can counter a year's worth of effort made by Russian forces. But Stepnohirsk is just the first step to the rest of Zaporizhzhia. Before we explain why, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If this is the kind of insight that you want to see, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos. Now, on the surface, Stepnohirsk may not seem like much. It's a tiny rural settlement, the likes of which Russia's massive military should be able to overrun. It clearly hasn't managed that. But Ukraine's liberation and derussification of this settlement has ramifications that stretch far beyond a village. Stepnohirsk was vital to Putin's plans for Zaporizhzhia, and here's why. When it comes to the chaos that Russia has been trying to create across the front lines with its infiltration groups, Stepnohirsk represents an opportunity for Ukraine to stabilize and straighten the front line. Ukraine now has a focal point that it can use to organize deeper pushes into the occupied portions of Zaporizhzhia, and that focal point is also what Russia has just lost. Before Ukraine liberated Stepnohirsk, the village was being prepped as a potential staging ground for future Russian advances into Zaporizhzhia. That's why Russia spent over a year trying and failing to capture the settlement. It's a launch pad, a pushing-off point that is also perfectly positioned to lend whoever controls Stepnohirsk fire control over the surrounding logistics routes. Do you remember the crossroads that we mentioned earlier that now represent Russia's sole remaining route back into the village? Those are the sorts of routes that Ukraine can now pelt with artillery whenever Russian forces are forced into assaulting Stepnohirsk. The settlement is also important to Putin. He may not say so, but at the end of 2025, Russia's leader made it clear that a push deeper into Zaporizhzhia city was a priority for the Russian military. On December 29th, Reuters reported that Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, who is one of Russia's leading commanders in the Dnieper military grouping, had told Putin that Russia's forces were just 15 kilometers outside of Zaporizhzhia city. which is the jewel in the crown of the region that lends the city its name. By that point, Reuters added, Russia already held about 75% of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, including the region's nuclear power plant. But the city has always been the main goal. And Putin confirmed that in December by telling his army to push on in its efforts to take Zaporizhzhia. Stepnohirsk was key to achieving that goal, as it was the type of staging ground that we mentioned earlier. Psychologically, this is a huge blow for Russia. A year of assaulting the settlement has gone down the drain, but strategically the blow is even worse. With Stepnohirsk under its control, Ukraine can now focus on pushing deeper into the Zaporizhzhia region, with Huliapola likely to be Ukraine's next target. That isn't to say that Ukraine is on the verge of retaking Huliapola. We'll explain why soon. But what this means for Putin is that the launch pad that was supposed to propel Russia's forces towards Zaporizhzhia city can now be used by Ukraine to force Russia to divert troops away from operations in the east of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. That's a problem for Putin. It means that Stepnohirsk has become Ukraine's first step toward liberating a region that has been under constant Russian assault since the start of the invasion. Coming back to the psychological blow inflicted on Russia, Stepnohirsk is an interesting case. Toward the end of 2025, Russia was making a whole lot of false claims about capturing settlements in the build-up to a renewed round of peace talks with Ukraine. Guess which settlement Russia claimed that it had captured during that period? That's right, Stepnohirsk. Russia claimed to have taken the settlement toward the end of December, along with supposedly taking Huliapola and Kupiansk. We saw how those claims turned out in Kupiansk, and we just saw them get rubbished in Stepnohirsk, and now Russia's forces in Huliapola have to be worried. Those who might have believed Russia's claims will also be wondering what's going on. Stepnohirsk was supposed to have been long taken, giving Putin more leverage in peace talks. Now it's fully in Ukraine's hands. We talked about momentum earlier, and this liberation shows the world that Ukraine has the wind in its sails. If and when peace talks happen again, Ukraine can point to settlements like Stepnohirsk and say, look, Russia claimed it had taken this settlement, it was lying then, and it's been booted out now. So don't let Putin fool you into thinking that Russia is some all-conquering military. Who knows, Stepnohirsk and settlements like it may end up playing a larger part in peace talks than anybody could have anticipated. Still, anybody who had been paying attention to what was really happening in the settlement, even before Ukraine's derussification efforts, would have seen through Russia's lies. In February, which is 2 months after Russia claimed to have captured Stepnohirsk, the reality of what was happening in the village was brought to light. Russia hadn't captured anything. Stepnohirsk had been turned into such a lethal kill zone that Russian soldiers sent into the settlement were lasting an average of 12 minutes before they were hunted down and eliminated. Now that Ukraine controls Stepnohirsk, that type of kill zone can be created elsewhere. Bit by bit, Ukraine can push deeper into the grey zones where Russia claims victories that it hasn't achieved. That brings us back to what happens next in Ukraine's likely push in the direction of Huliapola. Russia's offensive in that direction already wasn't going especially well. Remember, Russia has already claimed the capture of Huliapola back in December 2025. But by April, the new voice of Ukraine was reporting that Russia had prioritized a push toward the settlement, which isn't the kind of thing you need to do when you've already captured something. Even then, Ukraine's counterattacks were wreaking havoc. The Ukrainian push in the Oleksandriivka direction had forced Russia to redeploy reserves intended for Huliapola. And that's the point. Weak points in the Russian lines were being created, even in April. Now, this doesn't mean that the capture of Stepnohirsk means that Huliapola is next. There are several dozen kilometers between the two settlements, so one doesn't lead into the other. Russia has also managed to create a stronger defensive line in the Huliapola region than it has elsewhere in the Zaporizhzhia direction. However, what Ukraine can do now is start to counterattack against other small settlements. Russia has been sending infiltrators all over, just as it did in Stepnohirsk. A renewed Ukrainian push in the direction of Huliapola likely won't reach that settlement just yet, but it will distract, it will force redeployments, and all of that means that Russia won't be able to push on as it intends towards Zaporizhzhia city. And here's the kicker, Russia already knows that its plans for Zaporizhzhia in 2026 are done. When Putin planned the 2026 spring offensive, Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia were the two major goals. Now it's just Donetsk. That's according to a May 19th report by the New Voice of Ukraine, which quoted the deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Pavlo Palisa, as noting that Russia has so far failed to meet any of their deadlines. Donetsk is supposed to fall by early September, Palisa revealed, but the glacial pace of Russia's progress in that direction means that deadline will come and go long before Donetsk falls. The byproduct of that failure is that Russia won't be able to strengthen its push into Zaporizhzhia. It will still try, but reserves will have to go toward Donetsk. And when Ukraine is derussifying places like Stepnohirsk, the odds climb higher that we'll end up seeing either a stalemate or even a Ukrainian advance deeper into Zaporizhzhia by the end of 2026. The broader picture here is that Ukraine has once again completed a successful counterattack. That was never in Putin's plan. A May 9th report from the ISW says that Russia's spring offensive has practically stalled out, as Russia has failed to make any significant operational breakthroughs for an entire year. What territory has been taken, especially in 2026, is limited and strategically insignificant, the ISW adds. Compounding that problem, and soon to be an issue for Russia dozens of miles behind the new Stepnohirsk front, now that Ukraine has control, is Ukraine's mid-range strategy. Ukraine is combining the rocket strikes using systems like HIMARS that have helped it strike the Russian near ear in the past with a new generation of mid-range drones that are wrecking Russian logistics and command behind the front. Ukraine's mid-range drone strikes had already doubled in April compared to March, as Ukraine increasingly hit targets up to 180 kilometers behind the front. That's another danger for Russia and its Zaporizhzhia ambitions. Ukraine may not be in a position to push for Mariupol yet, but with Stepnohirsk as a new staging ground, it can unleash middle-range drones on the settlement and surrounding territories to disrupt Russia's push towards Zaporizhzhia for a distance. And each strike weakens Russia. Every time Russia is weakened, opportunities for more counterattacks present themselves. Russia has no answer. It never expected any of this to happen in the first place. An unbelievable overnight victory for Ukraine may end up being the first step toward the total liberation of Zaporizhzhia. And elsewhere in Ukraine's east and southeast, the liberation march goes on. It's a story fit for a Hollywood script, with intrigue, covert planning, and assaults carried out under the cover of fog. Check out our video to see the full story unfold. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you never miss our coverage of Ukraine's latest victories against Russia. And thank you as always for watching.